Welcome to another episode of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit you with another video, and today we're going to be continuing our afternoon/evening series of What If Naruto Was in High School DxD, kicking off Season 2, Part 1, Rise of the White Dragon. First and foremost, thank you for all of your feedback and the comments going into the reboot of this series. Really means a lot to me with the restructuring of everything. Wasn't really sure if rebooting it was going to go in a good direction or not, but I can say that I am happy with how things are turning out so far, and I'm hoping to continue the momentum with Season 2. Now, the intro isn't going to be too long. We're going to get into the story real soon, but before we do, I do want to go over a brief change that I will be doing with the storytelling. That being that I want to try to go for a more streamlined, regular sense of storytelling, and I'm not really quite sure how to articulate this, but if you're familiar with that one weeb and how he does his storytelling, I'm going to try using some of that style simply because I like that format and it's a lot simpler for me with how I structure my storytelling and how I give my notes. It's a little hard to write like long scripts of dialogue all the time. Like I might ad-lib some dialogue here or there when it's needed, but other than that, I would like to stick mainly to the storytelling. So I hope that isn't too big of an issue. This would make the videos not as long, but it might be long enough. This video is probably going to be within an hour or just barely under it, simply because for Season 2, it's basically the tale of two seasons essentially. So with Season 2, the first two videos are not going to be overly long. However, the season finale for Season 2 is gonna be a bit long. Might go an hour, 30 minutes, might go to within 2 hours, simply because there's a lot to cover in the second half of Season 2. So that's just something to keep in mind going forward with the story. But other than that, I do hope you guys are enjoying the series so far. If you haven't already, please check out the earlier video from today, that being What If Deku Was Trained by Master Roshi. That is going to be one of the morning storylines that I'll be doing on a weekly basis, so hope you'll enjoy that as well. Stay tuned for other series coming out later on this week. We'll be continuing What If Deku Was a Power Ranger. We'll also be doing Naruto Yokai, What If Sasuke Uchiha Was a Girl, and Naruto Mystic Adventures, What If Naruto Was Trained by Doctor Strange. So look forward to that and everything else that is to come with Power Core Productions and Podcastings. But as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. After the battle with Riser Phoenix, life would seemingly return back to normal for Naruto, or at least as normal as one's life can be when you are a devil after all. Among many of the members of the House of Grimmery, Naruto had found himself forming strong bonds with many of them, engaging and indulging in various aspects and getting to know more about his house. He would go training with Kiba from time to time, matching his kunai work against his blade works. Kiba still holding a slight edge in terms of speed, however Naruto's raw speed alone was just enough to match him, keeping the two on their toes as they enjoyed the friendly rivalry. Akeno had become a lot more friendlier with Naruto, especially when it came to removing the dragon's essence from his left hand, as giving it up for a gain of power had its drawbacks, using his own chakra as well as magic healing from both Asya and Akeno to keep his hand in regular human form instead of the gauntlet. However, most of the change would have come when it came to Rias and Asuya, who both seemed to always be vying for Naruto's attention. A lot more than Naruto could honestly say that he were comfortable with. It wasn't that he had anything against the two girls personally, but it was simply just a matter of things like relationships and girls and other aspects of the regular teenage life were things that Naruto didn't think he'd ever get to experience so soon. Buying himself the eyes of envy from other boys in his class, as it seemed as though the upstart from nowhere had suddenly garnered the attention of some of the most beautiful girls in school. Naruto not really seeing it that way, as to him they were simply just his friends. However, to the females of the House of Grimmery, Naruto had proven to be much more than that. Even Konako enjoyed Naruto's company, even if he could be an idiot from time to time. The two going snack hopping from different food stands and gathering different foods and drinks to enjoy each other's time, often exploring and trying new cuisines in the area. While all this were going on, it would be around the time of spring, and the Occult Research Club would need to be cleaned out for spring cleaning. With nowhere else to meet, Rias would decide that the club meeting would take place at Naruto's home. As everyone would gather that evening after school, Rias would go over the monthly count, counting all of the packs that had been made by the House of Grimmery. Akano came in first with 11, followed by Konako with 10. Kiba would come in third at 8. Naruto would have 6 packs under his belt, and Asuya would have 3. Rias would thank Naruto and Asuya for their hard work, knowing that the two of them were having major growth, especially Naruto. His skill set made him rather proficient when it came to being a devil. Of course, his number of tricks could range from anything from teleportation to transformations to showing off whatever cool jutsu he could do or helping his clients in any way that they asked for. Mainly, Naruto had been able to get his Flying Raijin kunai back with the assistance of Rias, whose family fortune was nothing to sneeze at. Getting Naruto custom-made kunais to assist him in battle, as well as in his work as a devil, was the least that she could do, after almost all of his kunai had been destroyed in his fight against Riser Phoenix, as he incinerated all of them to ash. Naruto having his kunais rebuilt with a much more stronger metal and a much more sturdier base made them a lot more easier to use. He would have 12 made and fashioned specifically for him, storing all 12 inside of a scroll that he would always keep on himself at all times. Rias would have his one original kunai that she would keep close with her, as Naruto had instructed her to do so, stating that if she ever needed him, that would be his way of getting back to her as quickly as possible. It would take some time, but Naruto would eventually be able to engrave the Flying Raijin seal on all 12 of his kunai, being very careful to write the formula just as his father had instructed. It were rather complicated and hard to use, even so that Naruto couldn't just put it on with his hands. He had to do it by writing it verbatim, one at a time. And even then, he had to be very careful. If just one ink stroke was out of place, the jutsu formula could be completely ruined and everything would go out of whack. The safest thing that Naruto could do was only use the Flying Raijin with the kunai, and simply using the seals and the sealing pack that he had made with them could basically reverse summon himself to any of the kunais at any given time, and they proved to be rather effective in battle. As the group were finishing up their count for the evening, Naruto's mom would come into the room with baby pictures of Naruto. Naruto feeling immensely embarrassed and wishing that his mother hadn't done so, but it would prove to be too late, as the girls of the House of Grimmery would all geek and gawk over baby Naruto, looking from his time in infancy to his various exploits as a young child. One that really stood out was a year during Halloween when Naruto decided to dress up as a ninja. Everyone laughing at this fact simply because, knowing of Naruto's true nature, it seemed to be perfectly fitting for him. However, Naruto would simply lament that at the time he had no idea what his heritage was, and that was simply just by coincidence. As they continued to look through the photos, one would catch Kiba's eye. He would ask Naruto about one in particular with him and another child, noting that in the photo there was a sword behind the two. When Naruto would say that he didn't really remember much about the child in the photo, only remembering that their family were known for going to church rather often, Kiba would remark that in the back of the photo was a holy sword, and that for it to show up near Naruto of all people were truly a coincidence. Naruto asking about a holy sword, but Kiba wouldn't really explain much, simply keeping it to himself as the night would go on. Naruto would get a call to fulfill a pact. Using his flying Raijin, he would quickly head over, hopping from rooftop to rooftop as he made his way to his client's apartment. He would meet an older man with blonde hair and dark streaks, dressed in a black kimono, as he would greet Naruto and invite him in. As Naruto would ask the man just what it was he had been summoned for, he would lament that he only wanted someone to talk to. Naruto thinking that this really wasn't much for a devil to do, but he would fulfill his pact to the best of his abilities. The two would go on to have a lengthy conversation speaking about various topics, even delving in a little bit of philosophy, although Naruto would be completely clueless as philosophy and studies and heavy thinking weren't really his alley, although he did like to talk about personal training and fitness, noting that that was one of the few things that he truly enjoyed in life. As the conversation would come to an end, the man would ask Naruto what he would like his payment to be. Naruto remarking that, as a member of the House of Grimmery, they were always told to keep their prices fair, and that conversation really wasn't anything all that expensive. However, as compensation, he would give Naruto a special painting, something that were very valuable, and he didn't have much use for it. Naruto would take it as compensation and bid him a good night. As he were making his way back home, he would get a call from Rias, stating that they had a stray devil to deal with. Taking the situation seriously, Naruto would ask if she had the flying Raijin kunai on her. Rias remarking yes, as she always made sure to keep it on her at all times. Naruto would tell her to fling it into the air and that he would be there momentarily. Hanging up the phone, Rias and the others would simply have a blank look on their face, but knowing what Naruto was capable of, they wouldn't be too surprised, as Rias would undo the seal that she kept her flying Raijin kunai in. She would fling it high into the air, and within a flash, Naruto would appear, catching it before jumping back down to the ground, handing it back to Rias with the painting on his back as he would sit it to the side. Rias always being impressed with Naruto and his skills, as he would do a little bow and thank them. Asking what the situation was, Rias would explain that they had a stray devil to deal with in an abandoned warehouse. As Naruto, Kiba, and Konako would go in to draw the devil out, Asuya, Akano, and Rias would stay on the outside and be on the finishing job when the devil was brought to them. As they would engage into battle, Naruto would create two shadow clones that would enter in from the left and to the right, Konako taking the center while Kiba would watch for the rear. As they would make their way within, they would see the stray devil as it would launch its attack at the three. Kiba being immensely distracted and not focused on the battle at hand, Konako almost being hit, if not for Naruto, moving in at the last moment to move her out of the way. As Kiba would snap back into the focus of the battle, both he and Naruto would quickly defeat the stray devil. Naruto using his Rasengan to blow it straight into the air, as Akano would go in for the finishing strike, catching it with her lightning before slamming it to the ground, as Rias would produce the final attack, incinerating the stray devil once and for all and finishing it. As the others would go outside to recover and heal from the attack, Rias would have to slap Kiba in the face, chastising him for letting his guard down and for almost letting Konako get hurt. Kiba would apologize for his actions as Rias would ask what were wrong, but Kiba would not have much to say, only leaving and bidding them a farewell as he would make his way through the city, lost in his own mind and his own thoughts. As everyone would return to their homes for the night, Naruto would talk about what he had seen earlier from Kiba, showing the picture that Kiba had seen to Rias, with he and the child in the Holy Sword. Rias remarking that that was definitely one of the Holy Swords from a project that had been conducted by the church long ago, something that had been kept so secret that even Asuya did not know of its existence. It was something known as the Holy Sword Project, a very blackened mark on the reputation of the church. So much so that many were excommunicated as a result of its failures, and that Kiba were one of the only sole survivors of the experiment. Naruto, now seeing why Kiba had been upset the whole time, would only grit his teeth in anger. It had not been lost on anyone that Naruto was not a fan of the fallen angels. He was also not a fan of the Holy Church as well, and it seemed as though the more he learned about them and their practices, the more disgusted he became with them. Of course, he couldn't blame everyone. After all, Asuya had been a faithful member of the church and there was no evil within her. However, Naruto's problem came with the fact that the church always seemed to have a moral high ground when it came to doing things. They were always ready to wash their hands clean of any incident and cast stones at devils and even fallen angels themselves. However, it seemed as though they never wanted to take responsibility for their own actions. They were the ones who branded Asuya as a heretic and pushed her away, when all she had done was try to help others, pushing her into the hands of the fallen angels, and in turn getting her killed in the process. And throughout all of that, Asuya still chose to remain faithful to God, who seemingly never answered her prayers. For Naruto, that was something that he couldn't accept. Knowing now that he lived in a world where God and the devil and other beings of legend existed, he would expect them to keep the promises that he had learned about as a young child. But the fact that they had not proved more than enough to Naruto that maybe everything were not as what he were told in Sunday school, at least whenever he chose to pay attention, or even went for that matter. No, the more time passed, the more Naruto were happy that he had chosen the life of the devil. It may not have been conventional, but it was honest, it was fair, and it was always taking the good with the bad. As Rias and Asuya would prepare the rest that night, both vying for Naruto's attention, this would be one of the few times where the Shadow Clone Jutsu would come in handy. Neither girl wanting to give up possession of Naruto, Naruto would create 2 clones for each girl to cuddle with. However, he would create a third clone as he would take it outside when they weren't looking, the two of them having a brief conversation. Naruto would tell the clone to go out and find Kiba, and if anything were to happen, to alert him immediately. The clone would do as he were told, and Naruto would wait for a response. As Kiba would be walking through the streets, as rain would be pouring down from the night sky, he would come across an alleyway where a priest who had obviously been injured would come running towards him, begging for help before being struck down from behind. As Kiba looked to see the attacker from the shadows, it would be revealed to be none other than the former priest himself, Freed Selzen. As he would dance with a Gideon of joy, mocking Kiba for coming out all alone, and stating that he had a new toy for him to play with. Kiba's eyes would widen in shock. for in Freed's hands he carried none other than a real holy sword Excalibur. As Kiba was not in the mood for Freed or his games, and he was definitely not in the mood to deal with the holy sword, Kiba would summon his own sword of darkness as the two would engage in combat. Kiba believing that he could use the darkness to absorb the holy sword's power, destroying it and Freed once and for all. Kiba would be fighting recklessly and more careless than before, and Freed would notice, taking full advantage of the sloppy devil's movements, cutting him across the arm and the back a few times, forcing Kiba on the retreat. It seemed as though Freed had speed that were comparable to his own. As the fight would continue to drag out, Kiba would put more and more of his efforts into trying to beat Freed. However, it was starting to become abundantly clear that Freed might hold the advantage. However, before Freed could land a critical blow, a blue orb would appear, pushing Freed back, as standing between them would be none other than Naruto, who would have his kunai at the ready, before turning back to Kiba and saying that he were getting rather sloppily, and he expected more from the Knight of the House of Grimmery. While Kiba would be thankful for Naruto and the assist, he would tell him to move aside, stating that this fight were between him and the Holy Sword user. Naruto remarking that he learned something about what Kiba had gone through. While he didn't understand fully, he knew well enough to know that something like a holy sword definitely had to be dangerous to devils, and he couldn't afford to be acting too reckless right now. He understood Kiba's need for revenge, and he wasn't going to deny him that, not at all. But they had to think this through carefully, and not go in so blind and half-cocked, or else they were both going to get killed. While Kiba would mull this over, he would ultimately decide that Naruto were right, the two of them getting their bearings together and moving as one. Freed would now have a hard time keeping up with the two, even with the enhancements of his holy sword. As the fight began to drag out, it would become clear that both Kiba and Naruto held the advantage. However, in the nick of time, Freed would get a call from the ones that he were doing business with, as he would bid both Kiba and Naruto farewell, disappearing in a poof of smoke in a magical circle. Kiba and Naruto would be left alone in the rain, as Freed had disappeared into the night. Naruto would go back to Kiba and check to see if he were okay. Kiba still being a little injured, Naruto would remark that they needed to head back to his home, and that both Rias and Asuya could help heal him. However, Kiba would deny it, stating that he would rather just go home and that these injuries wouldn't be too bad. While Naruto would protest, Kiba would not listen, as he would simply walk away. However, he would thank Naruto for the assistance, giving him a fist bump before returning home. Meanwhile, two new visitors had arrived into town, both dressed in the garbs of the Holy Church. A young girl with short blue hair with a green streak, and another girl with auburn hair and two pigtails on either side. They had arrived in the town for they had been given a mission to defeat the ones responsible for stealing the holy swords, and to return the holy swords to the church, or destroy them in the process. Naruto's shadow clone would disappear, and the original Naruto would gain the information from the clone firsthand. As it had been nightfall and both Asuya and Rias had fallen asleep, he would decide to tell Rias in the morning what had happened. While it might have been a little dangerous not to tell her right away, He didn't want to bother her while she was sleeping so peacefully. Neither one of them, as he would go on and get some sleep himself. Although the peace would not last too long, as Naruto would wake the next morning to find both Rias and Asuya in his bed once again. The two stating that the clones disappeared midway through the night and they couldn't afford to sleep without Naruto, so they just decided to come into his room. Naruto would be a bit creeped out by this. Again, not that he had anything against two beautiful girls sharing a bed with him, not at all. After all, he was a young teenage boy, and young teenage boys have needs. But still, he viewed them as friends, and he didn't want to ruin their friendship with muddying it with any unnecessary actions. Although that would be easier said than done, as the two girls would simply persist that they wanted to spend their time with Naruto, and there was going to be no changing that. As they were getting dressed for school, Naruto would tell Rias what happened the night before. Rias being shocked upon the news, and asking if Naruto were alright, and why he didn't say anything sooner. Naruto would remark that he didn't know about everything until recently, and even still, since nothing worse had happened, he thought that it would be okay just to wait until the morning to tell her, although he would apologize, knowing that he probably should have said something sooner. While Rias would be worried, she would thank Naruto for looking after Kiba, noting that it was only right that members of the House of Grimmery would stand beside one another, but that next time he shouldn't keep secrets. With that, the group would head to school and everything would be normal, or at least as normal as things could be. Rias and Akano would have a meeting with Sona and Tsubaki in a private area, as they also had business to discuss. As the four ladies would enjoy themselves in the sauna, Sona would tell Rias about the news of the two exorcists that had arrived in the town, both from the Holy Church, and stating that the two female exorcists wished to have a meeting with Rias Grimmery. Rias would be shocked at this news and everything that were happening, but if two exorcists were wishing to speak to her, and with the recent developments of Freed and the Holy Swords, it were obvious that this could not be a coincidence. As Naruto and Asuya would be making their way home, they would be greeted by two new guests who had stopped by to pay Naruto's parents a visit. A young girl who Naruto had recognized before, and another young girl who Naruto did not recognize at all. The girl with pigtails running up to Naruto and giving him a hug. Her name being Irina, and Naruto finally remembering her in the time that they spent together as children. Irina being so happy to see that Naruto were alive and well, as Zenobia would give them a once-over. They would make small talk and enjoy some tea. However, as they were leaving and Rias would be arriving to see firsthand what were happening, Rias would begin to panic, as she would make her way quickly over to her servants to make sure that everything were fine. However, Zenobia and Irina would quickly leave before getting a chance to meet with Rias. The two stating that they knew that Naruto and Asuya were devils, and that they looked forward to meeting their leader rather soon. As they had left, Rias would then arrive, hugging both Naruto and Asuya, and apologizing for not keeping a closer eye on her servants, and that she would make sure to be more attentive in the future. The next day, in the Occult Research Club, the two exorcists would have a meeting with Rias Grimmery to state the news of what had taken place, remarking that the Holy Swords had been stolen, or at least 3 out of the 6, remarking that from among the 3 that had been stolen, only 3 more remained with the church, and 2 were currently in the possession of both Irina and Zenobia. Zenobia having the Sword of Destruction, and Irina having the Sword of Mimicry. They would call for the meeting for one reason only, and that was to make sure that none of the other devils in the area would get involved with the situation, stating that it was to be handled by the exorcist and the members of the church, that they would deal with the fallen angels responsible for stealing the holy swords, and that they did not want the devils interfering, as they knew the holy swords could pose to be a threat to the devils, not knowing which side they would take in the conflict. Rias, however, would assure them that she had no interest in getting involved with the church or with the fallen angels, and she promised that no member of her household would interfere with the conflict. Coming to a mutual understanding, Zenobia would turn her attention to Asia, making many snide remarks for Asia, a former member of the church now turned devil, stating that if she truly did believe in God and wished to be forgiven, she could be exorcised here and now. This would piss off Naruto, even more so as he already had a disliking towards the church, but even still, that they could be so cold and heartless to someone that used to be one of their own comrades. Naruto would stand in between Asia and Zenobia, looking the girl up and down, as he would make no qualms about wanting to fight her. While Rias would try to calm down Naruto, she couldn't help but understand how he felt. It was the way that the world worked, but it was still cruel and unfair. Knowing full well that Asia had spent her whole life devoted to the church, to God, and for them to turn their backs on her like nothing had ever happened, despite them being the ones that put her in harm's way over and over again, it was something that Naruto couldn't stand. It was Freed, a former exorcist who had been working with the fallen angels. It had been the fallen angels who had killed Asia. It was the church that excommunicated her for healing a devil after trying to use her powers in the first place. And yet Asia still tried to remain loyal to God for as long as possible. Even now, the poor young girl would still try to read her Bible verses, even though it would give her immense headaches. For Naruto, day by day, he was starting to become sick of the church more and more. Zenobia would offer a chance to spar if Naruto had something on his chest. Kiba would then enter into the room, much to everyone's shock, and he would state that he too would like to spar with the exorcist, and that he had his own grievances with the church that both he and Naruto would wish to exorcise. With that, a sparring match would then begin, as Rias and the others would watch on, as both Kiba and Naruto would go up against Irina and Zenobia. Naruto would unseal all 12 of his flying Raijin kunai, as he would throw them all across the battlefield except for one that he kept in his hand. As the two would engage, Naruto would go straight for Zenobia, his kunai clashing with her sword of destruction, as Kiba would go one-on-one with Irina, as she would use her sword of mimicry to increase the length of the blade, as it would move all around the field. Kiba would use his sword burst to try to block and evade the attacks. As Naruto would continue his fight with Zenobia hacking away at Naruto, as well as the clones that he had made to try to take her down. He would soon pin her as he and two more clones had surrounded her in a triangular formation. Running through his hand signs, all three would perform the wind-style air bullet jutsu, launching them straight towards Zenobia, thinking that she had no chance of escape. However, Zenobia would spin her blade, hitting all of the air bullets, as her sword of destruction created an explosion pushing them back as well. Within the smoke, Naruto and Zenobia would continue their one-on-one clash. Naruto seeing firsthand the true might of a holy sword, realizing that its swings could be rather dangerous. But still, he had a few tricks of his own. As he would continue to create more clones that had been defeated, however, he would always only have a max of 7. His clones would move in formation as they would start to gain the upper hand on Zenobia a bit, pushing her back and forcing her to take a rather defensive stance. Zenobia would look to Irina, and within an instant, the two would rush at each other, switching to different sides of the battlefield and changing opponents. Irina, feeling a bit saddened that she would have to fight her former friend, now turned into a devil, seeing this as a test of her faith by God. Naruto not sure what to make of Irina and not knowing she had become such a zealot. But still, she did have a good heart at least, like Asya, so she couldn't be all bad. And besides, she wasn't the one that had talked so much shit before. It had been Zenobia. Kiba were also not interested in making peace, as he would create his magic swords to try to take Zenobia down. Although this would be easier said than done, as Zenobia would swat away everything that Kiba could throw at her. Zenobia taunting that Kiba were supposed to be an expert swordsman, although from what she had seen, she were less than impressed with what he could do. Naruto as well would be having a hard time with Irina, whose sword seemed to move and slither like a snake in the ground, striking away at his clones rather quickly and being hard to evade. Even the original Naruto were having some difficulty. As Naruto would summon his boosted gear, he would start to boost himself and his overall power, waiting for the right time to either boost himself to the max or transfer to Kiba. As both he and Kiba were now starting to get on the defensive more and more, he would look to him, Naruto throwing one of his flying rising kunai to Kiba, who would catch it in the air. The two would give each other a nod before rushing straight towards their opponents. Both Irina and Zenobia thinking that they were going to just swat away at the two of them, and that this would be an easy win. However, at the last moment, the two boys would trade places. Naruto with a Rasengan in hand, fully amplified and ready to clash straight with the Sword of Destruction. As Naruto would extend his arm, the massive Rasengan colliding with the large sword, it would create a massive explosion that would move everyone and rock the campus for a few meters. As Irina and Kiba had been caught off guard by the explosion itself, all four of the combatants would be pushed back. As Kiba and Naruto would get back up on their feet, still ready to continue the fight. Rias would step in between them all, stating that that was enough for the evening, and that all in all they had shown what they could do. While Zenobia and Irina wouldn't want to admit it, they were impressed by both Kiba and Naruto. Their teamwork was flawless, and Naruto had definitely a unique range of attacks and abilities that would make him a rather dangerous and formidable foe in the future. As they were preparing to leave, they would give this final bit of information, stating that they knew the ones who were responsible for the theft of the Holy Swords, that he had been a leader of the fallen class of the fallen angels, Kokobile. This would shock both Rias and Akano, as they knew Kokobile was one of the generals of the fallen angels, and that he were definitely a dangerous threat, and that if someone of the strength of Kokobile were involved and in this town, then it could definitely prove to be troublesome. Kiba, however, would simply be angered by it all. The fallen angels, the holy swords, he simply wanted them all destroyed. He would remark that he only had one intention, that he was going to hunt all of those who were responsible, and he were going to wipe the holy swords from existence. Irina and Zenobia couldn't disagree with that statement. While they did have the mission to try to regain the swords at all costs, ultimately, if they could not retain them, then they would have to be destroyed. Although even still, they would remark that they did not want the devils to get involved in the affair, and that if they do, they would be declared enemies of the church, and that the next time they meet, they would not be fighting in a spar, but they would be fighting to kill. As everyone would gather back into the occult research club, Kiba would make his feelings known, that he were going to hunt down the holy swords and destroy them. Although Rias would protest, stating that as a member of the House of Grimry, she could not allow him to do so, Kiba would simply turn back to her, stating that if that's what it took, then he would no longer be a member of the House of Grimry. Naruto rushing up to Kiba and grabbing him by the shoulder, telling him not to run and not to hold back his feelings, and that he shouldn't be so rude to Rias as she was only trying to help. While Kiba understood where Naruto were coming from, he would push him back, stating that while he was thankful for Naruto and all the help that he had done, and that he truly did consider him a friend, he did not know the full situation and everything that was at stake for him. This was something that he couldn't ignore. This was more to him. It meant more to him than anything. Sadly, it even meant more to him than his status as a member of the House of Grimry. With that, Kiba would walk off into the night, leaving them alone, and to wonder what they should do about their friend. Some time would pass, roughly a few days, and Naruto would be sitting at a cafe with Koneko, the two enjoying large parfaits as this area had been on their list of places to go and try new foods. While they were eating, they would see Saji of the House of Sea Tree. Koneko thinking that they might need some backup. However, Naruto would remark that if they did, it really wouldn't do them much good to get the House of Sea Tree involved. After all, he was more than enough for now. Koneko would agree, thinking that Naruto alone could be way more useful than Saji. After all, he only had 4 pawn pieces. With that, Naruto and Koneko would have to come to a decision on their own. Were they going to follow Rias' orders? Or were they going to have to go out on their own and help Kiba? Koneko would be very worried about him, as she considered him a close friend, and Naruto could tell of her worries. He would simply pat the young girl on the head, telling her that everything were going to be fine. They were going to make sure that Kiba were okay. They were going to make sure that he returned back to the House of Grimry, and they were going to destroy all of those holy swords. Koneko, for whatever reason, would smile at these words, feeling as though Naruto's words were comforting, and that he always seemed to make the impossible happen. And after how he had worked so hard to save Rias in the underworld, he had slowly earned the respect of many people around him, even her included, although she wasn't going to outright show her emotions, at least not yet. As the two would be making their way through the city, they would see 2 girls on the corner, begging for money. It wouldn't take long for them to realize that it was Zenobia and Irina, as they would walk over to them asking what were wrong. The 2 girls explaining that they had used all their money and funds and they were rather hungry. Naruto deciding that if they were going to form an alliance, then they needed to start off on the right foot. And as such, he would treat them to his favorite ramen. The 2 girls being immensely grateful as they were ordered 2 large bowls with extra helpings, devouring them completely as they had not eaten for a few days. Naruto having a heavy sigh as he could feel his wallet had now been completely burnt out of cash. As the 2 girls would thank Naruto for the meal, they would ask what his intentions were. Naruto explaining that he wanted to propose an alliance temporarily. He would note that he didn't fully like the church, or the exorcist, or them for that matter. No offense to Irina. But he did recognize that there was an importance. They both agreed that the holy swords were in the wrong hands, and that they needed to be taken away or destroyed at all costs. While Irina would remark that it would be dangerous to form an alliance with devils, Zenobia would also counter, stating that they had a mission to do what was needed by any means necessary, and that this alliance could be both beneficial to both sides, as long as it were made official and no one tried to double-cross the other. With that, the only one who they would need to get on board would be Kiba. However, Kiba would not be in the mood to work with members of the church. Before another fight can ensue, Naruto would step between them, stating that now was not the time to be getting involved in such petty squabbles, but rather it was the time for them to work together. They had no choice if they were going to succeed. They knew full well that if they tried to go on their own, not only would they fail, but they would potentially be killed in the process. And this town were filled with a bunch of innocent people who didn't sign up to be killed. And as such, Naruto felt that it was the duty of both sides to ensure the peace of not just the town, but potentially the entire world. Konako would be proud, knowing that Naruto could be pretty smart when he put his head to it. Naruto would take offense to those comments, as Kiba would agree with Naruto. Even if he didn't like the members of the church, or the exorcist, he knew fully well that they had to do what needed to be done in order to defeat and destroy all of the holy swords. When looking for a target or trying to figure out who would be the one most responsible, it wouldn't take long for Kiba to deduce the one behind it all. The man who had been responsible for the Holy Sword project all those years ago. The man who had been responsible for so much pain. The one known as the Archbishop Valper. That evening, Rias, along with Sona, would have a private meeting in Sona's secret oasis. Rias discussing her feelings on the matter with Kiba and how he had left the house. However, Sona would reassure Rias, her longtime friend, telling her that she had good members in her household and that Kiba was going through a very emotional time right now, but that even still he would return back to her house because he would not abandon his king. As the two would be wrapping up their conversation, they would get a call via Magic Circle from both of their assistants, Akano and Tsubaki. Tsubaki coming across information as while Naruto had his heart in the right place, his mouth was rather large and a certain someone overheard their plans. Of course, he could have said absolutely nothing, but if Sona found out that he had said absolutely nothing, he knew the situation that would have come his way, and the last thing he wanted was 1,000 lashes. So he told his subordinates, who would in turn be telling Rias the situation at hand, that Naruto was attempting to form an alliance, and that the alliance were working their way to find the Holy Swords. And that is where we are going to conclude today's video of What If Naruto Was in High School DxD Season 2 Part 1 Rise of the White Dragon. Do hope you guys like the new format in the storytelling. Again, I feel like I'm always changing things with this channel all the time, but I'm trying to improve and make things as better as possible. I know some videos could go an hour and could be an hour, but I gotta be entirely frank. It's a lot harder to try to make videos that are really, really long just for the sake of making them really, really long. I like my storytelling to be descriptive and to be good so that you guys can immerse yourself in the storytelling. And I'll add dialogue when needed. But for the most part, I kind of want to refrain from making super extra long stories simply because, I feel like it can be a little time consuming. It takes time to record, to write, to put everything together. So to have the Cliff Notes version and to just ad lib and add the parts that are needed when the time comes, that's kind of just an easier format for me. Not saying that video is going to be coming out in like 20 minutes. No, not at all. I still like the 40 to 45 minute ratio. And I mean, if a video needs to go an hour and beyond, then so be it. You know, that's just the way things work. But if I can avoid that at all possible, then I would like to do so. But all in all, I do hope you guys are enjoying the reboot so far. So am I, as well as enjoying the other content on the channel. I have so much planned going into the fall and winter of this year. We are on the road to 1K and beyond. Really want to try to hit 1K before the end of the year going into 2022, because I have so much that I want to do with this channel. So many stories that I want to tell, new series that I want to create, and you never know, might dabble into some other things going into 2022. Other, what if content and things of that nature. So stay tuned for that and everything else that is to come with Power Core Productions and Podcastings. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of this video. I'm Javon Harrington with Power Core Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.